guys are good evening, and welcome to the school committee meeting of April 5th, 2023. This meeting is being recorded, and I think it's being broadcast on WHCA. As we start all meetings, if you could please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. So tonight's meeting is predominantly focused around the regional agreement discussion. But before we get to that, we do have public comment if anyone is here for public comment. Right, go ahead.
Very good. Brook Street. I'm one of those crazy people who watches the meetings pretty much every week. Just a piece of advice that I would give to the school committee, however you guys want to take it is up to you. I think the one thing that the school committee really needs to do in the next years, hopefully, is really start to get a little bit more PR focused with the towns. And what I mean by PR focused is everybody here has the best intentions, the kids at heart, making sure that they have the best education they possibly can. If you have a robotics program that you want to bring into the school, if you have new languages you want to bring into the school, I would suggest you advertise those intentions well before the budget season. And what I'm talking about is maybe a letter to the Board of Selectmen in each town saying, you know, the Whitman-Hanson Regional School District would like to add these particular programs into the budget for fiscal year 24 or something like that. And just make it known that these are the estimated costs. What do you guys think? And really ask for their opinion. I'm all for more programs and studies in the school. Obviously, I have 3 kids in the school. The more money we spend, the better. But it doesn't help when it seems like all 3 components of this school district are fighting against each other. The select boards on both sides and the board and the school committee board as well. So I would just take that piece of advice as somebody who is a strong supporter of the school system. Do not want to see all 3 of these entities keep fighting and bickering back and forth at each other about budgets and so on. Let your intentions be known well ahead of the budget season. And if you want to add programs, bring it to the townspeople and the Board of Selectmen so they have a good understanding about why the budget is going to get bigger and what it does for our students in town. But other than that, I really appreciate all the work that everybody here does because you guys do a great job. My kids are getting a fantastic education. I can't thank you guys enough. And I don't think anybody here has bad intentions. But I think that we just all need to get on the same page and be a little bit better about working with each other in a collaborative effort. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Good evening. My name's Jim Hickey, Perry Ave, Hanson. I did try to yield to John, but he wanted me to go first. So I am a selectman, but I'm not here as a selectman. I'm here as a citizen of Hanson and as a member of the regional school agreement. I think everyone knows that the Hanson board voted, and I know you folks are going to discuss this tonight. So, and the Hanson board has already voted with the idea of the 2/3 vote being the best way or the easiest way to get our point across. Now, we also know that the Whitman Board of Selectmen voted no, although Selectman King did vote yes on it. And I understand that it was my idea, it was the simplest way by voting on everything on a 2/3 vote, just to keep it simple. But the main things are the budget, you know, and that sort of thing. But if you watched the Selectmen's meeting last night, you may have heard Justin Evans say that it is starting to swing towards the Whitman side with their property values and median income. It's not that way yet, and we have the statutory method, and Hanson has accepted it. But what I wanted you folks to think about tonight before you actually discuss any part of the agreement that we have worked hard and that goes for Chris and myself, to get it to this point, to bring it to the other committees. If it happens that at some point, say in the next 5 or 6 years, that Whitman ends up being the wealthier town, the statutory method is here forever, as far as I can see. But with a 6-4 advantage, without a 2/3 majority vote, the year that happens, the school committee could take a vote to go back to the alternative method and win 6-4, because there are 6 Whitman members and only 4 Hanson members. This was one of the reasons why I suggested to the committee that we go for a 2/3 vote. I just wanted everybody to think about that tonight before they actually start discussing it. Thank you.
Thank you.
John Galvin, 41 High Street, Whitman. As Mr. Hickey mentioned last night, I think we all know that the 2 boards of selectmen met together over in Hanson. Wouldn't be surprised if a lot of you didn't listen to it, but maybe you did. But the results of that meeting have a big impact on everybody, the school committee, both towns. They basically voted not to support, they voted not to support the school budget at town meeting and in their warrant process. What does that mean? That means that basically the school's budget and the town's budget are now in competition with one another, more than likely on the town meeting floor. Not going to be a good result. It's a lose-lose situation no matter how it goes. If you have option A, the school cuts services, has layoffs. Option B, the towns have cut services and have layoffs. It's a lose-lose situation. Nobody wins. Certainly the citizens and the taxpayers of both towns don't win either way. But I want to suggest there's a third option that enables level services for not only the schools, but also for the towns. Now, how does that work? What am I talking about here? We've all heard about hold harmless and how that is affecting the school's budget. This particular year, first of all, what is hold harmless? Hold harmless is a result of a simple subtraction equation and a comparison. It takes the DESI formula for the foundation budget, which is basically takes all the components, a detailed formula of all the components in the school, and says this is what the minimum budget needs to be. Then it takes the required contributions and basically another complex formula, which is encompassing the basically the income of all the people and also the property values, and comes up with what the towns can afford to pay. When you subtract the minimum required contribution from the foundation budget, that gives you what the Chapter 70 money is comes to the town, comes to the district. When you compare that to what we had previous year, if what we had the previous year for Chapter 70 is less than what we get awarded, that's hold harmless. That difference is hold harmless. This year, currently, fiscal year 23, we have over 4,500,000 hold harmless in the hole. So what am I proposing? Well, I think many of us know that things have changed dramatically going forward in fiscal 24. Currently, right now, the governor's budget has our hold harmless swing by almost $4 million. We're currently, by my calculations, in hold harmless next year by about $655,000. So what am I proposing? I'm up here talking. What am I proposing? I'm proposing that the superintendent and probably the chair of the school committee meet with the town administrators and the chair of the Board of Selectmen. Ask them, what is the maximum that you can give to the schools without having to have layoffs, with keeping your services as they are now. Ask them what the maximum is and then ask them to give a little bit more. In return, the district used one-time money for this year only to balance the budget. Now, what am I talking about? Well, right now, by my calculations, the scenario that I have calculated would be that if the school was to use $840,000 of one-time money, they could balance their budget and the towns could also have level services. Why does that work? Well, it's a one-time fix to get us to next year. Why do we need to get to next year? Because next year, the possibility exists that not only do we come out of hold harmless, but we could have come out of hold harmless significantly. If we have the same thing that happened this year, a $4 million swing, not only would that cover the $845,000 that I'm talking about you use in E&D or circuit breaker, however, one-time money, it would also cover the financial cliff that we've been talking about for ESSER funds. In addition, it would allow the school to even increase services significantly. That's if we get the same swing we did this year. What if we don't? What if we get half of that? Let's say we only get a $2 million swing. We're still able to cover the financial cliff of ESSER, and we're still able to cover the one-time money that we're using for E&D. Okay? Now, is there risk of this? Yes, of course there's risk to this. Okay? If you take the $840,000 that I'm proposing in the scenario that I have, couple it with the $600,000 that you're already planning to use for cover the data breach, that would leave you with a little over $300,000 in E&D going into this year. Is that ideal? Of course it's not. It's not ideal. But it certainly sounds a lot better to me than having to have the district cut services and have layoffs, or the towns have services, cut services and have layoffs. I've already had this, presented this to a couple of the Whitman selectmen, and they thought it had a significant merit. I would hope that the Hanson Board of Selectmen would also consider it. And all I'm asking you is that later on in this meeting, when you're setting your agenda for the next meeting, that you include this in your discussion or a budget discussion. Give some time for this to possibly come together by next week and see what we can do. I certainly think it's a better option than battling it out on town meeting floor.
All right, thank you. Anyone else for public comment? Okay. All right, we'll now move into the meeting agenda. So the first item is the meeting minutes of March 1st. So I would entertain a motion.
Make a motion to amend the meeting minutes. I'd like to...
Well, hang on. So how about you just make a motion to approve the minutes with the following amendments? Because amendment would be if we already had a motion. So I think if you just say, I want to make a motion to accept the minutes with the following changes, then we can just do it once.
Okay. Motion to accept the minutes for March 1st, 2023 with the following amendment on page 8 to add Ms. Byers requested supporting detail for the FY24 district-wide transportation contracted services expense of $1,796,556 as presented in budget document 18.
Great. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion on the minutes with the amendment?
I would prefer to see it presented with the amendment and have the opportunity to go back to the meeting where we're voting on some very specific language, just to make sure. That's my comfort level anyways.
Okay. Other discussion?
Is this the March 1st meeting minutes that you're talking about?
Yes.
Page 8?
Yeah,
I'm just looking for where is it?
So it's that section of transportation conversation that happened about start times and so forth.
Okay.
And my dialogue was simply on that busing document, which was document 18, there was a line that started the entire calculation with our cost of the district-wide transportation, and that was the 1.7 million. And I had simply asked if we could see supporting detail for where that starting number, what's contained in that. So it's not changing anything, it's just adding a request that I made during open meeting.
Everyone understand? Yes? No? Any other discussion? Everyone's okay? We move to a vote. I see some blank stares at me, so I'm trying to just figure out. We can do one of two things. I mean, if the committee feels strongly now and they want to see a red line, I'm sure we can do a red line for next meeting, insert it, and you can look at it next meeting if we want to go that way. I don't think a week is going to make a difference if people feel concerned. At the same time, it seems like a pretty simple sentence that's being added was a request. So
I know myself, I just want to verify the sentence. I just want to have that opportunity.
Okay, so we'll take it to a vote. If the vote passes, we're done, and if not, we can kind of figure out how to proceed. All those in favor of the minutes with the amendment? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All those against? And abstaining. Okay, that's everyone. Okay, so the motion carries. Thank you. I would entertain a motion to accept the minutes of March 8th, 2023.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion on those? Okay, all those in favor? Unanimous. Excellent. All right. So we'll now move into the Regional Agreement Committee discussion. So all of you should have either in front of you or online, I know it was on the drive and Jen sent it around again, basically the document, the consensus document. This is the same document that hopefully has made its way to some other boards and committees. And so our task tonight is really to talk through this, kind of get a sense of where the committee sits with this. The RAC will be meeting again on Monday. And so our job collectively, Chris and I, our job will be to take kind of what we hear here in terms of feedback and support or not support, or back to that regional agreement committee so we can kind of all come together and figure out how we proceed from there. So
I have a question first before we start, Chris. So we're not voting on this.
Well, so that's where I was going to go.
Oh, okay,
sorry. No problem. So what I was going to suggest is it might be helpful for us to vote just in terms of support. Again, it's not binding. We're not agreeing to anything legally. What I was going to suggest is, hey, for each one of these, can I get a vote of support or not, support in favor or against of what we've talked about? Because that's going to give us some feedback, right? I think it's going to be helpful to understand, for example, on item whatever, Z, if the committee votes 10-0, well, that's very different than 5-5 or 6-4, or right? So I think if we can kind of get a sense of where the committee's at, that's going to help us as a RAC when we talk about it on Monday night. Because again, it might be, well, the committee voted 0-10 or 10-0 in support. Well, that kind of is very different than 5-5. It might be, well, let's kind of figure this out versus, Jim shared one, for example, where we got a 5-0 and an 0-5. Again, might be helpful because that one might just be as simple as we got to get some folks in a room and figure it out because clearly we're way over here. So are we close? Are there tweaks or are we far apart? So that's what I was going to suggest. Again, they're not binding votes. It doesn't mean we've agreed to it. It doesn't mean we've committed to it. It just means general support one way or another.
I didn't want a binding.
Exactly. It would not be about, it would just be a consensus support type vote if folks are okay with that. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we'll get to the first one. And I think there's 7. Is it 7? I lost count. 6. So the first one is in no particular order. The first one was around representation. And so basically the Regional Agreement Committee discussed, there was a member who already spoke to that today, that brought forward the notion of the concept of a 2/3 vote. And so there was a lot of discussion within the RAC of, town votes and things like that. And, the suggestion was made, well, if we had a 2/3 vote, that kind of would create that opportunity to maybe have more of a binding vote within the committee. So kind of want to open that up for some discussion and then we can kind of talk through it. So Fred and Beth.
I want to address, for Mr. Hickey, and I can appreciate and understand his concern of going around the statutory method. If that is the method that is in the agreement, that's the only method that can be used without changing the agreement. So
We can,
because
yeah, hang on. So, yeah, we're not going to do back and forth.
Yeah,
I
no,
think,
that's not-
right, we'll take the feedback and these are some things we can follow.
What he just said is not true.
So,
Mr. Chief,
hang
it's
on.
not true. Because the agreement was...
So, hang on, Chip. So, well, first, why don't you come up?
Well, this
But
is
let's
not-
try not to do
this
too
is
much
not
back and
supposed
forth.
Okay, and I'm sorry to interrupt Chris, Mr. Chairman, but what Mr. Small just said isn't true, because in 2018, there was an amendment put on the agreement. The agreement was not changed and would not have to be changed in the future. Just another agreement put on to go back
But
to the alternative
so
method.
Jim, I think the part we could research is we could validate through legal counsel as part of the process as to whether there's an accuracy or not, right? The reason I think, and there's some nuance, but it's relevant, the reason the agreement changed was because there was a law that superseded the agreement. So, right, so there's two different pieces. There's the agreement and the language in the agreement, and then there's state law. So the old agreement got trumped by law. Now, the question that Fred is raising is, if we put something in the agreement, is it now binding? Again, absent state law changing. Now, if the legislator wakes up, a year from now and says, if you live in Whitman-Hanson, this is how you're going to have to vote, and they pass a law, then it probably is a moot point what's in the agreement. So I think we could probably take that away as maybe some feedback. I'm not sure it's as black and white.
as part of, the 2018 committee and living through the statutory, the way Mass General Law states is you can use your agreement method, but your method needs to be voted on annually by the towns on town hall floor. So you're voting on the agreement method, okay? As long as your towns vote to accept that, and each town would have to accept it, then that would be the method, okay? That's what was in our old agreement, okay? If it gets pushed back to the school committee, then going forward, the only method that can be used is statutory, okay? If we don't have any language to an agreement method within our agreement, and the only method is statutory, is spelled out, there's no way for the committee to arbitrarily change that. That's what it has to be, and that's under Mass General Law, and it complies with Mass General Law. So I just want to alleviate, in my mind, your concern of something like that happening. And while I can never speak for myself or for anyone else but myself, and I won't be around forever, but I would never vote for anything else but the statutory, no matter which way the pendulum swung, because what's fair is fair, and that's what we've decided, and that's what we've agreed. So, that's my own personal way of doing it. But I don't think we have to worry about that aspect of anything. I think our committee, is generally, a committee that you see us either unanimous or one or two different votes at times. But to handcuff ourselves to have to be 2/3, I think would be hazardous. And I can't see us handcuffing ourselves within the agreement for that.
Okay. I got Beth and then Dee.
Okay, so my assumption then, it would be a 7-3, would be?
So I
That's
think,
what's
yeah, I mean,
considered-
we'd
is
have
that
to-
considered the 2/3?
There would-
There's no official 2/3 here.
Right, well, we kind of left this open-ended, but we probably would, whether it's this committee or the RAC, would have to put some parameters around this, right? So for example, like the budget vote is a 2/3 requirement, and it's etched in state law. So I would argue whatever we vote here is going to, back to the point, like that's superseded by state law, because state law is very clear. And we also got guidance from legal counsel that said it was 2/3 of the committee, not 2/3 of those present, 2/3 of the committee. So we kind of had this situation a few years back where we were kind of, it was very clear. It didn't matter how many people were here. You need 7 votes to pass a budget. So if we have 6, we could have a quorum and have a school committee meeting, but we can't pass a budget because we need 7 votes. So again, there's some nuances and there's probably still some parameters, and this is kind of why we have this discussion tonight, and we'll have more discussions as the RAC. We got to kind of clarify, I would presume or assume, like if we wanted to support a 2/3 vote for all votes, it would be, maybe with some language like, as long as it doesn't, isn't superseded by state law. So for example,
Yeah, but
we'd have to still.
But you brought up a point I was going to bring up, because because if we don't have a full board here, so then we can't vote on anything? That's my concern.
Well, and again,
you know
I
what
think-
mean? So I would have to see in writing, before I say, yeah, I agree with this, I would have to see that it says that 2/3 of the people present, except when superseded by vote.
So this is exactly why we're having the conversation, because that might be the feedback we take back to the rep.
Okay.
Like that might be language that
Well,
we
you can
say.
take mine back.
Well, we got to get to consensus, but right, like that could be it.
No, because that's a concern of mine. If we, if there's, somebody, there's a lot of people, we've had some that, we've had a couple people out, and it might not be a 2/3 vote. Or you might have, somebody abstain and everything, and then where do you
Right,
go?
right.
So that's my concern with it. I don't have as much, angst about it as other people, but I just think there has to be more parameters around it. That's what my concern is.
And that's
Okay?
the whole point of the conversation tonight, so
Thank you.
thank you for that feedback. David, and then Chris.
Yeah, so first, as Mr. Small just said, I want to thank Mr. Hickey and the Regional Agreement Amendment Committee for their time. They've sacrificed a lot of Mondays, reviewing this, and obviously it isn't easy to go to both boards of selectmen and come back here to try to work on what we can compromise on and then find some common ground between all that, especially this time of year. To Mr. Small's point, and maybe point of clarification of either superintendent or sheriff, you could. So to Mr. Hickey's point, hypothetically speaking, so say, it swings to the favor, or the Whitman becomes the wealthier town, and hypothetically 6 school committee members, say they're from Whitman, votes to instill an alternative method, right? So in that case, even if that were to happen and we go to town meeting, at that point the town of Hanson at town meeting could vote that down, and even if it passed in Whitman, it still wouldn't matter, and we would have to go to a super town meeting. And to my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, if we had a super town meeting, the only method you can use is the statutory method because of the legal statute. So then at that point, it wouldn't even matter because the statutory method is the only method we could use. So I appreciate Mr. Hickey's concern because I think it's a valid one, but I do want to point that out too, where I believe all roads point to the statutory method as we talked about in 2020 and 2021. The best point, and Jeff, we kind of talked about this briefly when I first sat down, what comes to mind with the 2/3 vote, I think of school choice and how that would work. Because obviously if there are committee members who aren't in favor of school choice, how would we approach that? And to my understanding, I guess state law would supersede that in that case, where the 2/3 vote wouldn't matter. It would simply have to be a majority vote, but I don't know. I mean, that's something we would need to ask legal counsel about. So while I'm not against the 2/3 or in favor of it, I do think it's something we should talk about and figure out more. And the other part I'd like to mention is I believe, and I don't want to speak on behalf of anyone, but I believe the essence of the 2/3 vote is to make sure that both municipalities have their voice heard and there's the proper representation. And I respect that. However, I will point out in a lot of our 6-4 votes, it's never been on town lines. It's really, in my opinion, personality. And then also the viewpoint. And what I mean by personality is that the viewpoint of those individuals and the representation and what they stand by and their principles. I don't think it's necessarily, Hanson votes this way, Whitman votes that way. And we could look at, most recently the 6-4 vote we had regarding line items that Ms. Byers made the motion for. I know it was a 6-4 vote during reorganization to appoint me as secretary. I'm trying to think of some other 6-4 votes, but I really can't recall. Oh, and the mask vote was 6-4, and that wasn't town lines. But I can't really recall a vote that has been strictly Whitman-Hanson since I've been here. And I understand back in 2020-21 it was very contentious between the municipalities, but I do want to point that out too. And again, thank you for your time. And I guess I think we should really look into the legal aspect of it and how it impacts school choice and maybe other votes that I haven't considered while reviewing this. And then again, I just want to point out that I don't think it's really been town lines in the close votes that we have had. And again, just one more thing, again, statutory, all roads seem to lead to statutory unless anything else comes up, state law, but yeah.
Chris?
So first of all, it was a privilege and an honor to serve on the previous regional agreement amendment committee and this version of the regional agreement committee, because I think there's nothing more germane than coming up with a document that we both communities refer to in terms of how we're going to conduct things, in the future. And, I welcome the opportunity to give, a lot of thought and consideration to both member towns when discussing these things. And when Jim brought this up, I really couldn't get my head around it and think like, well, what would that mean? And why would we want to do that? Why wouldn't we want to do that? So that's why I'm thrilled and appreciate the feedback from the committee, because that's how it should work. The committee should give their input, and then we go back to the committee and we report back and we work from there. And these things are difficult, and going through the statutory method situation was difficult. But when things get difficult, behavior of those involved is really telling, right? And so I've always been a big advocate of considering Whitman-Hanson and the school committee as three partners in this partnership. And I've always advocated for that to be considered in all different, situations that impact the district to the level that a budget would or a regional agreement committee would. I appreciate the opportunity to hear from everyone in terms of what direction we should go forward when we're, considering the partnership. And again, when things get difficult, I think it's incumbent upon a good partner to consider the other partners. So I ask that we all do that. Thank you.
Hillary?
So we vote on a lot of things that aren't just budget. I think, Beth, this might have been what you were getting to. I understand, and I'm not against the idea of a 2/3 vote when it comes to financial implications for the member towns. I see value in that. I think that is really important. My concern about making it a 2/3 vote for everything is that we might never get anything done. Or because if we don't get a 2/3 vote, we can't go back and re-vote it, right? I mean, is that how things work?
Well, so if it's something we have to do, then we would continue voting until we got to it.
But other than, okay. That's a loaded question, right? What do we have to do? We have to pass a budget.
Correct.
Are there other things that we have to do? Right? I think what I'm thinking with this is putting language in that any decision made by the school committee that would require has financial implications for either town, and that is also ambiguous language, I suppose. I think that's where this is coming from, and I see value in it, and I totally understand that. I worry that if we say it unilaterally for all of the votes we take, we won't get anything passed. To David's point, the mask vote was a 6-4 vote, so that wouldn't have passed, right? And that, I think, would kind of have backfired for the majority of people in towns based on the feedback that we got. So I think that's something else to consider. I think that Mr. Hickey's intent is the financial piece, right? Talking about that, and I think that if there's language in there, however legalities can make it, I think that I would be comfortable with that, and I would be supportive of that kind of language, not a unilateral, I don't know, what other, field trip votes. I mean, you know what I mean? There are a lot of things that we vote on that are they are consequential to the students, but inconsequential to our boards of selectmen and things like that, so.
Other folks, I saw Fred again, but I want to get round one before we round two done.
So, one important thing in charge of this committee is hiring a superintendent, and we'd love for you to stay eternity, but you plan to retire. So at some point in the future, 10 people on this committee will make a decision to hire a superintendent. Is that going to require a 2/3 vote? Could that impact that decision? I don't associate us along town lines. We are Whitman-Hanson, and it's one word to me, Whitman-Hanson School Committee. So 10 people are Whitman-Hanson, and I therefore believe that a majority should vote, a majority vote. And I'd like to ask the question, have we checked with legal? Are we allowed to make this decision in the regional agreement are there any laws that actually say by a majority vote? Or do most of the general ed laws say by a vote of the school committee, and then it's determined? So if we can clarify that, because I think for the purpose of conducting business in day-to-day, a majority vote should serve if we are not thinking along town lines.
So the only thing I would throw when I look at this, I think the more we move to consensus, so I think while it may be difficult to get to consensus, the more we move to consensus, the better off we are. Right? I think some of those 6-4 votes that we're referencing, yes, we got stuff to move forward, but it probably didn't lead, it was a challenge because clearly we had one vote, one swing from, not moving forward. And we have had 5-5 votes. We've had them plenty of times. And then we just keep going. Like, to me, I think about the mask thing, we would have just, well, we got to do something. We can't not have a policy, so we would have just kept going. It might have taken a little bit longer. So to me, at first I was kind of like, I kind of like the way it is. I told Jim this. I like the majority vote. But the more I think about it, the more there's something like this that pushes us towards a consensus, I think the better off we are. So, the way I was looking at it was certainly, the two caveats I had in my mind were, where state law applies. We can't supersede state law. And then reorganization, because I think that's a tough one. Right? I think we might be here all night sometimes if it's like, well, we got to get to, at that point, it's kind of, so other than that, to me, I didn't see I think a 2/3 could work because it forces consensus. Now, again, I'm not going to be a hypocrite. Easy for me to say as I'm walking off the committee and you guys might have to be here for 4 hours arguing about it. So I certainly respect the will of the committee on this, because if we had a 2/3 vote and we're stuck 6-4, again, there's certain things that we're going to have to do. We have to hire a superintendent. Like, there's no, no, I'm not saying you weren't here. I'm using our example. If there wasn't a superintendent here and we had to hire one, like, there is no option of like, well, I guess we just won't hire one. We're stuck at 5. So we would have to do it. So to me, I can see it working. But I do think, again, that I would suggest maybe with the caveats of we can't supersede state law and not for reorganization. Everything else, again, would be 2/3. That was, again, my 2 cents. Fred.
One, and this maybe speaks to my point, for us to be able to pick and choose what we can and can't vote on, other than what's state law, it just goes to show what we've been doing with the majority rules and, the way our country works and every other board works, majority rules. I think it's pretty simple. Now, I don't want to throw Mr. Hickey's concerns aside, because they're valid. I can understand where he's coming from. But, to clarify, once it's in the agreement that it's statutory method, it's approved by both town meetings and it's approved by the commissioner of DESI. So there is no changing it. That vote could never come to this committee to be anything else but statutory without changing the agreement. And I'm hoping that would alleviate, your concern, because, you're entitled, for that. And perhaps, and I don't know if, depending upon what our consensus is, if Mr. Hickey brought that back to his committee as well, if that was the only quote-unquote sticking point. I know Whitman has already...
Yeah, just for context, when we talked about 2/3 at the RAC, there was never any discussion about statutory or alternative method. So that was not, when this document was created, that was not even a conversation. So I don't want to get hung up on statutory alternative as the reason for this, because that was never discussed by the RAC. Certainly it's a concern, but it wasn't the concern because...
And that's sort of what, and I don't mean to put him on the spot.
Yeah, so I think the general thought was 2/3 as a way of consensus, kind of avoiding some of the town stuff. That was how we talked about it up to that point. There was no, Chris, unless you remember otherwise, I don't remember any conversation about alternative or statutory when we talked about this in RAC.
No, and,
I'm sorry, David, let me...
No worries.
And that kind of comes to my point is that when Jim brought it up, we never asked him directly why he brought it up. I took him, it's a matter of representation, and it doesn't take, scientists to figure out that, the contentious issues in our recent history have been on statutory method and the budget, right, and things pertaining to that. So And his first remarks tonight even went directly to that. So in my mind, I don't mean to put words in Jim's mouth or thoughts in his head, but it certainly seems like that is the driving factor. And we can give Jim a chance to respond if we choose. But so that, I guess, going back to my original comments, I wanted to come here and hear from the rest of the group because I really I couldn't get my head around. I couldn't figure out if it was going to be too cumbersome or if it was a concession we can make to Hanson, that in regards to the partnership and making people feel more involved and inclusive and things like that. It's like, but if the main concern, and again, we'll give Mr. Hickey a chance at some point to respond, if the main concern is the statutory method, and that's been, alleviated or it's not a concern, right? I guess, apparently, we can confirm that. Then what is the objective?
So again, I'm going back to when we talked about this at RAC,
Sure.
and this is why I see Jim sitting there, but like, this isn't the Jim Hickey amendment, right? This is the RAC, right? So this is what we talked about as a committee.
Yes.
And if I 90% certain the whole basis for this conversation was around, hey, we got 4 members of one town and 6 of the other.
Yes.
And that was where it came from. There was no discussion about statutory alternative. It sounds like that may be a concern now, which is fine, but there was zero conversation.
I don't dispute that at all.
Right.
But my point in saying that is, just because it wasn't discussed doesn't mean there wasn't a primary factor.
I don't know. I don't know, but if we didn't discuss it as a committee, I don't think we can convey it as the primary factor tonight, because to me that's what I'm trying to be. I'm trying to be responsible of, we met
itself.
6 times and we talked about this. We never talked about that. So to now spring it on the school committee is like, hey, this is the reason this is on here. It's kind of like, whoa, wait a second. We met 6, 7, 8 weeks in a row.
Right.
And that wasn't it's a concern. That's fair.
Yeah.
But I don't think it was we're going to have a 2/3 vote because of the statutory and we're having a lot of conversation on that right now. So that's where I'm trying to bring it back to, like, context is important, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and believe me, I'm all about being fair and considering the rest of that committee and whatnot. Absolutely. But it just seems a little, I don't know, it seems to be a little disconnect or something. What's that?
Move the question, because
I got David and then I got Clay.
You're hearing what everybody's saying, and that's great.
Yeah. Everyone has perspective, and that's ultimately where we got to get there. So otherwise we will be here all night on every one of these. But go ahead, David.
All right, thank you. So to Fred's point, and correct me if I'm wrong on what you just said, Fred, typically majority rules in government, right? But there is one exception to that rule that I've noticed in U.S. government, and that's the Senate, where they have the filibuster. And you can even look back statistically when that filibuster was instilled and the amount of legislation that has passed since then.
There are some exceptions to the rule.
No, absolutely, there is, and then the parliamentary procedure. But I just, I want to add that, and to Hillary's point, the filibuster, to my understanding, was created in a way to incentivize compromise, but at the end of the day, it also can be used to obstruct our ability to proceed with our daily operations, which is a concern of mine. So if we were to instill a 2/3 vote on everything, all encompassing, I do believe it could backfire on our ability, whether it's to hire a superintendent or during reorganization or a contentious vote on a particular policy or things along those lines.
3 times. Yeah, it's been nice.
Right.
But 4 years.
But yeah, I just wanted to bring that up too. While I can see where, or what I believe to be the mindset going into making that recommendation, I do want to caution that it could also impede our ability to get things done, as previously stated.
Glenn, and then I'm going to give Jim a minute, and then we're going to get a consensus vote on this.
I just want, like Don said, we're Whitman-Hanson. We're not Whitman and Hanson. And when I signed up for a RAN or whatever, however I got here, which I still don't understand how I got here, but
You're here.
I never, ever thought I was here to represent my town. You know, I'm here for the students of Whitman-Hanson and the taxpayers. And if we start voting for our town, then I just feel we're doing a disservice to the committee. And I honestly don't believe that any of us here would we're not spies, we're not moles, we're not here to, let's take care of Hanson, let's take care of Whitman. So I feel fine with majority because I think we'll all vote for what we think's best for the mutual parties. That's it.
Thank you. Jim?
Briefly,
please. Briefly.
Yeah, I'll be less than a
Because we're
minute.
on 1 of 7.
Look at your watch.
Yeah.
I want to thank Fred and David for explaining it to me.
Here's what I
because
found.
up until this point, I didn't know that could happen. David, the one thing that scares me at a super meeting is that by the time a super meeting comes, we could be on a 1/12 budget,
Sure.
which scares the heck out of me. Chris, I'm not running for anything. You know that. I will tell you the truth. I am concerned for the town of Hanson with the statutory method. I never brought it up at one of our meetings because it didn't need to be brought up.
Right.
Okay? And I don't want to stand here tonight and people calling each other or texting each other going home saying he's full of crap. This was his plan all along. But what scares me is, and Chris, we've talked about it, we're not going to be here.
Right.
One of the things that you folks are going to talk about later on is having the agreement looked at every 3 years. No question
Jim,
about
if
it.
you could not go there, because that's next. We got to get there.
I'm sorry. So, but when there's quite a few of us that aren't even going to be here at the end of May. Frank is already gone, Chris is leaving, and I'm leaving. So this RAC committee is going to have to be filled with other people, and we're going to have to catch them up. Now, talking with you and Chris, my idea was simple, but we perfected it by saying anything that has a financial situation to it. And what scares me, and it could happen in 2029, after this agreement finally gets, the commissioner sees it, it's finally in play, and 3 years later, it's 2029. And I'll be totally honest, Whitman is the wealthier town and decide they don't want it anymore. And we could go to a 1/12 budget.
Okay.
It would have
Hang on,
to...
Fred.
And that's all I have to say. My minute's up. Thank you very much.
Sean, next.
Go on the vote.
You're telling me to go, but then you keep jumping in, Fred, so you got to make up your
Let's go to
mind.
the vote.
So, here we go. Sean, please.
I would just say that there are complications to the proposal, but I think we should recognize that this is very important to certain people in Hanson, and Hanson has been through a difficult time. And to recognize that and to give a concession in that way, I think is more than symbolic. I think it's really meaningful. And I would like to move ahead over the next couple of years and really build a much stronger relationship with Hanson so that we can do more good things together, and I think this would really spark that. So,
Okay. Frank. We're not going to, guys, we're going to be here all night. Just let
I'll
these
be
guys
super brief.
come to the meeting, let them give 2 cents.
Absolutely.
1 second.
I'll be super brief. I would just like the committee members to think about the perception of what that vote actually means, right? So Whitman still has your 6 members that you have there, but it means that both towns on any issue essentially have the same power, right? It's a very important thing for after a couple of years ago when the method changed, a vast majority of the complaints in Hanson we're paying more, but we don't have a 5-5 split. Whitman has the extra vote that's there. And it was a huge point of animosity that I heard. I'm almost positive Mr. Howard, because I called him about it too, trying for him to explain the method. But people don't understand the fact that the financial votes are a super major or a 2/3 vote. They don't really understand that. They can't grasp that, right? So people don't pay attention enough to the school committee votes when it doesn't matter to know that our operating budget is a 2/3 vote. So making everything a 2/3 vote is the simplest solution to say that, we have 4 members in Hanson, 6 members in Whitman, 2/3 Hanson absolutely has to have a say in that vote in order for it to pass. It would just go a long way and ease a lot of troubles in Hanson if I could take a guess of what that would do to just make that concession.
Thank you. So, hang on 1 second. So, I'm going to ask the committee members if they have something new, not a rehashing of an argument we've already heard. Great. Otherwise, let's kind of go to a support. So, I had Fred and then Chris. Something new?
I would,
I'll try to think of something.
Because I think it's been good conversation, and I look at the committee members, and I think they
But we've
probably
got
have a
all these
sense of where
others to
they...
do.
yeah.
I absolutely have something new.
I touched on it, and that
It's not
is just
new.
to say,
Just go quick.
okay, it puts an undue restriction on our board, and it does not affect, and I can appreciate the Board of Selectmen and appreciate the position you're in, but the restraint and constraints that would be placed would end up being placed upon this committee, and it could prohibit our ability to properly serve. Votes don't come down by town. I mean, that was one vote that came down by town, but generally votes come down by people. Mr. Forth said it earlier. It's more of the person, not by town, when you're talking our majority.
Chris?
So my new comment is about the nature of this meeting, right? And why we're having this process of a RAC committee and why we kick it back to the main committee to discuss these things, right? Because it deserves it. Because we should have public comment. We should be patient, listen to these people. We should not be rushing anything to any particular vote. We should be giving it the amount of respect and consideration it deserves to hear from everyone and make thoughtful decisions. So I take issue with the rush to move to anything when we're talking about the regional agreement, which is the single document that binds us all together.
So, Chris, I completely appreciate the point. My point is, if we're just hearing the same, I'm trying to convince you of my position over and over and over again, we can do that. And I'm happy to do that if that's what the committee wants to, but to me, that's an effective use of time. So if there's something new, public comment, absolutely. But if it's, I'm going to make the same statement 5 times to try and convince you to change your mind, as chair, I'm going to try and move us along.
No problem with something new, Chris. No problem with that approach.
Right.
That's not what I'm talking about.
Okay.
So can we move the vote, please?
I'd like to make a motion that the consensus of the committee be to not adopt a 7-3
2/3.
or 2/3 vote. So keep things the way they are.
Okay.
This is
now,
non-binding.
majority.
Yeah, this is non-binding. Well, he said the consensus.
Consensus.
Correct. He said consensus support of the committee. Yeah, we're not, yeah. Can we have a second? Everyone understands, so we're voting to not support in this particular case.
Non-binding.
Non-binding. No, so this is basically to go back.
Let's
Yes,
just
you
go
know the
back
way.
to the
This is going to go back to the
Go back to the
rec.
rec and you're going to discuss our concerns.
Yes, everyone understand?
Got it.
All right, we'll move to the vote. So-
Wait, hold on.
Oh, yeah,
The question.
So
you have a question?
yeah, well, I had my hand raised before the vote was made or the motion was made.
Go ahead.
But it pertains to the vote. My first question was, are we going to move to a vote after we're done discussing? I'm assuming yes now. But the other part I wanted to bring up was, while it's non-binding and it seems like, committee members have some concerns, and I think from a legal counsel standpoint, there's things we need to review to understand what supersedes what. Like, for example, we know, the budget vote and the methodology is one of those things, but maybe we should get some feedback pertaining to school choice too, and how that would work, whether it would just be a simple majority, because I'm pretty sure that's what the statute says, or if it would be 2/3 because of regional agreement. My point being is, I just don't feel, me personally speaking, I don't feel comfortable voting yay or nay on this particular matter, just because I feel like there's more feedback that we need to get from other parties, particularly legal counsel, and maybe that wording may be amended to reflect something different than what's currently written down. And I personally just feel like, as if, if I voted no tonight, I feel like it sends off the wrong message, as if I'm, inherently against this idea, and I'm not at all.
Just to clarify, if you vote no, you'd be in favor.
Yeah.
Right, sorry, yeah, right.
I don't want to confuse
Thank
people
you, that,
as we're about
yes.
to vote.
But if I vote yes against it, I just don't feel like that would be particularly fair to the Regional Agreement Committee and to Mr. Hickey, who has spent his free time coming here to elaborate and provide more clarification to his rationale. So my particular suggestion to the committee is maybe not vote on it, or, I know there's a motion on the floor, but maybe abstain or move forward, because I just feel like it just sends the wrong message one way or another, and I understand that it's not binding, but I just feel like with the changes that possibly will be reflected later on, that maybe it's inappropriate to make a decision one way or another. And again, personally speaking, that's where I'm coming from.
And again, you guys can jump all over me if you disagree, but to me, the vote is helpful because it's a non-binding consensus support. So if you vote yes, and that's a very clear message back to the RAC that this is not something that wants to be considered, that's very helpful, because we got to move this forward, or we're just going to keep talking around in circles for months and months and months. We got to kind of know where people are. So if folks say, yes, I'm in favor of the way things are and I don't want it to change, that's going to send a message back to the RAC. If folks are, no, I kind of want to maybe think about whether it's other parameters or how this could work, okay, that sends a message back to the RAC. Or maybe that's through an abstention. But I think we need something.
Well, I feel like our deliberations also clarified that too.
It is, but I'm not sure that deliberation transcends the context. I mean, we spent 10 minutes trying to figure out what the context of the RAC was. So without kind of getting a vote and seeing like, hey, it's kind of close or it's not, I just think we're going to be doing this over again in the RAC or someone else's over and over. We got to kind of know where people stand. So
No, I understand.
again, I don't think
We
it's...
have a vote. Let's go.
Yeah,
So vote, please.
Yes.
Can I just ask I just have a question. This is not a comment about anything. I have a question on the process.
Yes.
Because I want to understand.
That's fair.
So this is a non-binding consensus vote. So we support it. We don't.
Yep.
I think you had said that the select boards had done a similar
Something
thing.
similar.
Okay. So then, are we going to find ourselves back here? Like if it goes back to RAC, and you're like, okay, we decided we're going to put it in. Are we going to find ourselves back here having these same conversations? Okay.
We could have the same conversation. Here's the real fun part. We could all agree, and it can go to town meeting.
So that okay. So
and it can get picked apart
Great.
there.
Great. So right.
But we got to do something. I mean, we got to get it to town meeting. Because
Right.
if we just keep talking around in circles, we're going to have a 50-year-old.
Can you repeat the motion, please?
Yeah.
The motion was to not support the 2/3 vote as presented.
Okay. So everyone's clear? So all those in favor?
I'm just not sure what
I'm not sure.
Yes.
A
So,
yes
let me
vote
clarify.
keeps things the way they are.
A yes vote is not doing the 2/3, keeping things...
Keep things as a majority vote.
A no vote is
For now.
to try and change it to more of a 2/3 or something like
And
that.
that's
No,
the
that's not
information to give back to...
What?
The no vote just means we might need to think about it a little bit more and get more information.
Which was what I was
Correct.
saying.
Right.
A yes vote means no, we're not doing this.
My
So,
intention
let's
is
go
the
back.
yes vote gives you
Clarity,
folks
correct.
the ability
We don't wanna
and
talk.
clarity
Right.
to say to the committee, the
All
RAC
right, let's
committee,
get back.
Either vote does that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does.
Yes.
Which way we're voting. Right. So all those in favor of the motion, signify by raising your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, and abstaining. Okay, and sorry, 5. So it was 4, 5, 1. So
you don't have a 2/3. I couldn't resist.
4, 5, 1. Okay, still helpful because again,
Yes.
that gives everyone a kind of an indicator of like, yeah, that's all we need. Right. Okay.
Okay.
Moving on to the next
Number
Number 2, the agreement review. So basically there is, and I'm going to caution everyone, this is kind of some draft language. This has not been legally reviewed. It hasn't gone, but it's just, again, we're trying to give you a sense. And to paraphrase this, it was basically, there was a lot of discussion around, hey, we don't look at this agreement. It gets approved and then it gets stuck in a file somewhere and then we pull it out when there's an issue. So basically what the RAC tried to do is come up with a way that basically every 3 years it has to go to all 3 parties. It has to go to both boards of selectmen and it has to go to the select board and the selectmen and it has to go to the school committee. It just has to go onto the agenda. Review RAC, right? Or review regional agreement. At that point, it can go on the agenda and everyone can say, yeah, it's in the pack, I took a look at it, I'm good, we're moving on. Or they can say, ooh, wait a second, I read this, did you realize? Or, hey, I have a concern, or I have a question, we need to form a RAC. Then it would come back to the school committee, let me finish 1 second, I'll get to you. It would come back to the school committee, right? And then the school committee would form a RAC just like we did, and we'd come together and figure it out. So it basically creates a mechanism in the agreement that all parties need to, once every 3 years, and we picked a date of September because we were kind of anticipating kind of how maybe this would work in terms of changeover or reorganizations, elections and things like that, and that's what we did. So that was the concept. Right.
I just think it just makes total sense.
Yep. I think this is an easy one.
3 years.
We go from one extreme to this.
The only thing I question is 3 or 5 years, and I believe it's required by law that it's reviewed every 5 years.
That's what we said, but we didn't. So the discussion
Now,
was...
I understand that it was, at least somebody would still be on the committees when you rotate it on 3-year basis, and that makes sense too.
That was the goal.
Yeah.
That's true.
I agree.
Yeah, so just point of clarification, I wasn't positive. Was there previous language in the regional agreement for it to be amended every X amount of years?
I think it was supposed to be reviewed every five. And this is where we kind of talked about having some language that... So if you put language in an agreement that says it's supposed to be reviewed every 5, and then there isn't like this extra like takeaway or action item, then it just, 10, 15, 20 years pass and it won't make sense. So by doing this, we were trying to build something that we could put on the school committee calendar. The towns could put on their calendar. Hey, every 3 years. It's September of 3+ years. It's time to put it on the agenda. We talk about it. We do it. So it would just kind of hopefully make sure this happens.
Yeah. So I think it's a great idea. My only concern, as the issue we had back in 2020, dating back to '91 when it was supposed to be amended or reviewed every 5 years, is I think you can put whatever words you want in there, and I think it's great verbiage to have. But the concern is, I think at the end of the day, it comes down to how proactive our representatives are, and if they're willing to review it and make sure they prioritize the regional agreement when it comes to that fiscal year.
Yeah.
So obviously...
Yes, no. So going along that vein...
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I just want it in the minutes that I yielded.
How you stormed out.
Let David finish and then we'll go.
So I don't know how you enforce something like that, but I think, we all need to, if we're still on this board and during 3 years from now, whoever's there, we all need to be proactive and do our due diligence to make sure we're not in a situation come, 2050 and go, oh, methodology got introduced during Student Opportunities Act that nobody knew of, something along the lines of that. I think it's great to have this wording in here, but I just caution to our representatives on the school committee and to either boards in both municipalities to make sure that we're, doing our due diligence to review the agreement along with, whatever our job encompasses as well. So I just again, I caution that we actually do this.
Right. So I think the kicker that we talked about, we fleshed this out a little bit, if memory serves, and what we said was, each board would have to put it on their agenda, and as long as it's on their agenda, even if they don't do it, we forget, but it's on the agenda, then that is the acceptance of it for another 3 years. So the key was not necessarily to not do it like what happened in '91. The key was like there are things we have to put on the school committee agenda every year. Let's call it school choice. You have to vote on that every year. So even if you don't, once it's on the agenda, that committee accepts it for another 3 years. The feeling of the 3 years was because that there would be members on it so that would jog their memory to do the right thing. But that was the premise, if my memory serves.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Chris, and then Craig.
Just to David's point, I completely share his maybe a frustration or curiosity about why things weren't addressed when they should have been years ago. I think this is a step towards, I can't say ensuring that, but at least it's a step towards, a step closer to ensure that people will be looking at this on a regular basis for the reasons you articulated.
I would just envision that once we voted this in, that it gets placed on the calendar for the next, 15 years. It's 5 meetings, and it'll be a living, breathing item. I'm sure Jen would, be glad to set it up in Google calendars along with our emails and et cetera. And that way there, at least we won't forget, and then we do it to fail-safe of both towns needing to do the same.
David.
So I had an idea. I just thought of it right now. So in order to maybe deter that or prevent it from happening again is when the Regional Agreement Amendment Committee convenes and the regional agreement has been voted on by the municipalities and by the school committee and town meeting, obviously, maybe then it would also be a good idea to set a date for when they reconvene. So maybe, it's September of 2026 or whatnot, but at least there's a day and time or time period to set that on the agenda, because for all we know, we could have 3 different chairs, and if a committee member doesn't remind that chair, and if they weren't on the committee during that time period, they might not know to set the agenda at that time period. So at least if we agree, hey, let's review the regional agreement in September of 2026 to have something ready for town meeting in 2027, then we kind of know, and we have kind of a set date that everyone can kind of set, the municipality and the school district, and then when it comes that time, whoever is around can review it at that point in time. Just an idea.
So the language that's presented is once it's signed by the Commissioner of DESE on that 3rd September, that's when it goes on everyone's agenda. So I think it's already contemplated that we can't set a date now, because if we set a date now, to Jim's point, the commissioner might not be getting it until 2029. So we may still be within the same rack at the, depending on where we're at. So this is basically, once the commissioner stamps it, he's the final sign off. That sets the trigger. Great. Now it's 3 years, September of whatever year that is.
Right. Sorry, I thought that was pertaining to another thing.
No, that's
the lease part.
Well, let Fred go first.
Well, I was going to actually make a motion that we agree to this language. The consensus of the committee would be to agree to this and to instruct the superintendent that on the 3rd anniversary of...
So again, we're just looking for consensus of support.
But you may want to write
it
into the committee that's the superintendent's responsibility at the opening of school meeting, subsequently before the 3 years is up, that gets placed on the agenda. That way there, it's part of the agreement, it's part of the superintendent's responsibilities, and while I'm sure if, some of us will still be here perhaps, and we'll remember, but then again, we have a fail-safe along with the 2 towns.
Thank you. I just wanted to kind of put David's concerns at ease a little bit. The committee, the RAC committee, would only be in hiatus for a 3-year period. Now, the idea of going 3 years is because 5 years didn't work. And none of us were here in 91 or 01 or maybe even 2011. When, the first 20 years was never looked at. If it was, we wouldn't be here tonight trying to figure it out. It would be a RAC committee trying to figure out what's best for the next 3 years. So by going with the 3 years, even though some of us may be gone, some of us will still be here on the RAC committee, or at least in our own committees. That we won't ever have a full change, but every 3 years, 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 people could change. But it would only go in a hiatus until that, time that they need to meet, and it could be 1 or 2 meetings, and they're done. And, Chris, we have a lot of members here. There's only 4 voting members, but we have a lot of members here. And there is excellent dialogue. And we get through what we have to get through in 1 hour and 15 minutes every Monday night. And we're going to continue until we get it done. Well, some of us, I'm not, but some of us are going to continue until we get it done and get it done right. And that's why we need your help. So I just wanted to say thanks, and that's why I wanted the 3 years.
I appreciate the clarification.
And it was my idea too.
Motion that the consensus of the committee to be behind this.
Second.
I just have a question. About how long is it going to take? I know, again.
I'm going to start laughing.
Tonight? Or?
No, we're talking about submitting, and trust me, I get it. I work with DESE every day. How long are we talking? Are we really talking that it might be a year before the commissioner accepts the regional agreement?
That would be ambitious.
Okay, so it gets approved at town meeting, and then you send it.
So hold on.
No. Process. I know it might not be this
but I'm
town
saying
meeting.
process, right? So before we get to town meeting.
No, I know. Let's say it's all worked out and it's been approved at town meetings. Hypothetically, work with me here, right?
Sure.
So it's been approved. So we send it off to the commissioner. Are we really talking 6 months to a year before he approves it?
Oh no, I would assume a month. I don't know.
A couple months?
I would say 3.
So should it change to as soon as it's agreed upon at town meeting? Does it have to be stamped by the commissioner, legally speaking?
Yeah, it's not binding until it's signed.
All right.
So that's what exactly, or she, right?
Okay.
That's where we got to. Technically, it doesn't count until they sign.
Great.
Right?
Perfect.
So that's where we landed. We did have town meeting at one point, so good question. I see where you're going.
Yes.
Sorry. I thought you were asking how long is it going to take?
No.
No one knows. Yes.
No, I'm ready to vote. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll say yes or no.
All those in favor.
No.
Voted.
Hey, we got 2/3.
Unanimous.
2/3, right? Yeah.
All right, next one, Lisa's. So the next one kind of has to do with the other one, but there are some key components. So basically, the only thing we talked about in the lease section was to strike certain language, and the language that we're looking to strike is basically then addressed in item number 4. So if you look at number 3, there's that strike through where it says the committee shall be authorized to make major improvements, alterations, additions, or capital expenditures to town-owned schools, but only after notification of the appropriate member town selectmen. Approved projects will be part of the district budget. So we struck that because we came up with a different mechanism altogether. So,
And you put it in 4.
and then we put in 4. So if you want, we can kind of maybe not necessarily vote on 3 and kind of move to 4 and come back to 3 and 4 because they're kind of connected. If you felt strongly that you didn't like 3 and you wanted, or 4 and wanted to stick with where we were, then we'd probably come back. The only other thing was there was a lot of discussion by the RAC around leases and kind of responsibility, and where we kind of landed was because the individual leases are legally binding documents between the town and the district, that each of those should be looked at, and we would encourage them to look at sooner rather than later and deal with some of the issues at hand. But it was really, really outside of the purview of the RAC because we don't control those leases. It is a, I'm not going to propose a lease agreement committee, right? You almost need something between those bodies to kind of figure that out. It's not really the RAC's purview. So that was kind of that's the footnote at the bottom. The footnote's just for explanation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Whitman already kind of figured that out when we're doing the building.
Yes, that's where a lot of that conversation.
We have a sample lease.
So number, I'm going to move to number 4, and we'll kind of come back to 3 and 4. We'll take it together.
Move to 5.
Number, you want to move to 5? No,
well, that's the only.
No, we
really read. Oh, I'm sorry.
Hold on. Yeah, no, stick with me.
Sorry, 3.
Yeah. So 4 is basically the capital emergency repairs section. And there was a couple items that were relevant here. So there was a lot of discussion about the limit for those items. And so you can see an update where we've changed or proposed changing the expense. And this was proposed when I say the RAC, superintendent administration was involved, George, others were involved in this conversation, changing kind of that limit. I think someone did an inflation calculation. I think it was Frank Lyman. To kind of move that from, this is 5,000 a long time ago, let's make it 10. So that's where that came from. So we changed the reference from 5 to 10. And then there's this new language down below about emergency repairs. And that was really where we've kind of got stuck sometimes of late with kind of clarification. And so the emergency repairs section really has to do with defining what is an emergency repair. We said not covered by insurance. We set an amount, and then we also kind of tried to put some parameters, and we went back and forth on this. We left it open as basically defining it as operations of a school building as required to comply with the law. And then there was a notification requirement to the towns of the 72 hours, but basically that was that language. So it was trying to clarify kind of how this works when there is an emergency repair, what do we do, the responsibility of the towns, and the member towns, the other key here is the member towns would be responsible for cost and reimbursement to the districts. So again, if everyone agrees to this, it makes it really simple. There's an emergency repair, it's not covered by insurance, town's gonna pay. So that's the...
Yep, 2 things. One is any monies coming back from the towns is always subject to approval of town meeting.
Correct.
I know I was at the Whitman Selectmen's meeting when they brought this up, and they were going back and forth, and some of it was related to our mold issue, etc. And I made the suggestion, I believe they adopted it. It was very simple, prior authorization required. So the district notifies of an emergency repair. They acknowledge it, they have the chance to investigate it immediately, and they say, yep, you're all set, and we have that paper trail. That's something that is done, all the time in my business. That's how we make sure that, it's not a he said, she said, or somebody, drops a ball on us, etc. You have all those documents and that exact documentation. So I believe they're coming back to you with that, and I just wanted to, perhaps make the suggestion if the committee's willing, to have that type of language in there.
So you're suggesting that where it talks about the 72 hours notice, that there then would have to be an approval?
Correct.
Okay. So again, good feedback and consensus. I think we did talk about a little bit of some of this. I think the concern is this is an emergency repair. So there isn't a lot of time to convene a public meeting to proceed with the emergency repair.
But it's from the town administrator. basically saying that they're going to bring it to their Board of Selectmen. No, the Board of Selectmen or the town administrator cannot guarantee you're getting paid. That has to come from town meeting.
So I think, well, I don't know, Fred. I think if there's a binding contract that says if this happens, then this is what has to be paid, I don't think it has to. Now, town meeting can say we don't want to pay the landscaping bill, or we don't want to pay the, I don't know, ambulance repair bill, but there's still a contractual relationship between two parties that say that I'm going to pay.
The only one that can appropriate money is town meeting. They're the only ones that can appropriate the funds.
They're appropriating funds that may have already been contractually agreed upon.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? There's a difference.
But they could say no.
Of course they could.
Yeah.
And then it happens all the time, right? But again, I use my example. The Hanson ambulance gets broken and they send it to the repair shop and they sign a contract that says we'll pay you for the repairs, and then town meeting says we're not going to pay. Okay, guess what? The ambulance repair company is going to probably sue the town and say you said you were going to pay.
Absolutely.
Right.
But the town can't pay it if the town meeting doesn't appropriate the funds.
Okay. I hear your point, and so we can kind of maybe bounce that around, but other thoughts, comments, questions? Yeah.
I think, I completely agree with the increase, because that was $5,000 in 91?
Yes. Correct.
I mean, so let's be real here.
Frank did the numbers, it was around 11,000.
Yeah, I would say, yeah.
So we made the recommendation at 10.
When I see that, I don't think that's any argument. I don't have any argument with that. And I think to have this in here might alleviate some of the problems we have had in the past. I like that. As far as the payment and the costs, I like that, because there have been issues, and there's still one going.
And I didn't mean to cut you off. We really haven't had any emergency repair has been really fulfilled, correct, minus the one. And that's being done now. It's moving forward. So I think this was really fair. I think the notification piece, talking to the administrators, and I think your concern, Fred, will go to the committee, and then I can address it as far as...
Yeah, I'm making a note right now that says discuss with approval of town administrator, so we can bring it back to the RAC and talk.
Yep. So can we...
72 hours sufficient? That's my other question. Is that too long of a period of time, or is that...
I think that you mean for the administration to move forward with like a repair or something?
Or for once you notify the town, for them to get back to us. You know what I'm saying? Do you want to have some sort of a time frame? What's reasonable? If you have something that's going to close the school, I mean, you pretty much need immediate...
I'm making that decision.
Well, right, and I think the way the language is written is the towns need to be notified within 72 hours.
Yes.
So again, there was a lot of conversation of, again, something really bad happened, and it's impacting the safety of students, staff, both. They got to move forward. Yep. So the first focus isn't going to be, pick up the phone and let's let the town. The first focus is how do we remedy and mitigate, solve the issue. That'll be solved. Somewhere, not too long after, within 72 hours, we still got to communicate and let them know. Yes, maybe fixing the whatever issues first.
Hanson water pipes.
Right, Hanson water pipes. Although that's an insurance one, so right, like that would be but that's kind of the discussion we had. But yeah, this is an emergency
situation. Get into a situation like the middle school, where you have different varies of opinions as to what that repair is. You have some folks that feel, well, that's a maintenance issue. And I don't feel it was a maintenance issue. I feel it was a, sudden, a sudden breach. Granted, it may have built up, but we found out about it very suddenly and had to take action.
Other thoughts, Don?
Under number 3, elementary schools and middle, then it has the paragraph, an article will be presented to the selectman's office of the town for which capital improvements are requested. Approval of the voters will be required in order for the work to proceed.
Yep.
Does that only apply to number 3? And can we also check on the legality of that? Because it's always been my understanding as a regional school district, if this school committee votes to place an article on the warrant, then it goes on the town meeting warrant. I understand informing the towns, but the way this is worded, that these capital improvements are requested, leads one to believe that a municipality has the authority to rule on something that a regional school has voted on.
So I thought we looked at this, and maybe we can pull it up again, but I thought while the regional school district certainly has the ability to request those capital improvements, I didn't think the school committee actually has the direct authority from the Commonwealth to actually place something on a warrant.
I thought it was like the assessment where we're assessing expenses because
Okay, we can pull it.
Chapter 71,
I thought
Section
Andy
16.
came back. I thought this came up a while back, and we went back and forth, I thought, a couple times.
Could have sworn from years back that Ms. Byers is correct, that we do have the right to place warrants,
Anything on that?
articles on the warrant,
Yeah, I want to clarify. I think
for capital.
All right, we'll look at that. We can clarify, so we'll take that away.
Yeah, I just want to add to that, just looking at, it's Chapter 71, Education Laws for Massachusetts, Section 16, Regional School Districts' Powers and Duties. Under letter H, it's very brief, to assess member towns for any expenses of the district.
So where does that say we put it on the warrant?
Well, it says to assess member towns for expenses.
Right. So where does it say we, right, so I think that's the issue. So we can
So I
provide the
would like-
assessment, right. So I think, and we'll pull the email, because I remember looking at this, I thought it was within the last year. I think we can assess the towns. Now, the towns can figure out, they're going to have a really interesting situation. If we assess them, they choose not to put it on the warrant. We're back to like Fred's situation where we gave you the bill, you got to do something with it, and you choose to ignore it. Like, I don't know how that's going to work, but I think only the select board or board of selectmen has the authority to actually physically put something on the warrant. So I think it's like an indirect thing. I think
So
we can assess.
Maybe this committee, maybe I want to understand then this committee could vote the capital expenses with the assessment?
Correct. Yep.
And then...
Now, that's
and then it's
right.
the assessment.
That's a different thing.
Now
The
the
capital
right.
expenses are in the assessment.
Now the selectmen or select board has to figure out what they do with that assessment. Correct.
Well, it goes, yeah.
Right? If they don't want to put it on the warrant, like, I don't know how that would work, but I think they still have that. But we
I
can
just don't
clarify.
want to put language in here that is conflicting.
Absolutely.
The one thing I'd like to say is I think we're much better off being good, strong partners than being adversaries. I've always had the belief we could put something on the warrant, and as Beth just said, as a courtesy, we've relayed the articles, through the town, etc., as trying to be a good partner. So I'd just rather see us in the spirit of cooperation, being good partners.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris?
Yeah, I echo Fred's comments about being good partners, but I can't let it go by without kind of pointing out the obvious, that this committee keeps talking about being a good partner, and I'm not so sure we're getting the same cooperation from our partners. So,
great.
That's just a statement.
Back to the writing.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
We'll have lots of opportunities to discuss the cooperation.
So, Chris, do you want a motion on both at the same time, or one?
Yeah, I think just a general motion of consensus support on 3 and 4 would be wonderful, and I do have Fred's note about discuss with approval of town at the RAC, and we'll also follow up with Andy on this section as to what our powers are. So we'll kind of take that, that's part of this too.
Okay.
Can you add on to there? And perhaps you vetted it out really thoroughly, I don't know. 72 hours just to me sounds like a long time.
We did talk about 72 hours.
Okay. So, and I don't want to, the committee's put in a lot, I don't want to second guess your committee. It just, to me personally, that just seems like a long time.
Okay, so motion to have consensus for section 3.
Items 3 and 4.
3 and 4.
Second.
Items 3 and 4.
Any other discussion? All those in favor? Unanimous. Oh, sorry, all those against?
Yeah, I just,
Or abstaining? Sorry, 9-1. Got it. All right, no worries.
just holding out for that language, that's all.
No, that's fine. Oh, and that's helpful to know. Okay. Number 5. We could probably spend a lot of time talking about this, but not much at all. So basically, number 5 was literally lifting the language from the amendment to the regional agreement that was already approved and putting it here. The only thing we took out was, so if you pull up the amendment that was signed to the regional agreement between the towns and the district and all that good stuff when we were kind of working through this compromise, the only thing we pulled out was if you remember, the top section was like the bridge language. It was like the first year we'll do, whatever, 50-50. So obviously that's passed. We don't need to put it in here. So it was basically everything below. And again, this will be legally reviewed to make sure it's correct. But it's basically just putting it in the agreement. I think it's fairly straightforward. But questions, thoughts? Yeah, Don?
Yeah. So I do want to add a talking point. In letter D, so we understand the statutory method starts with the minimum local contribution. But letter D is something, and a lot of folks from both towns talk about, it's the law and you can't negotiate it. Well, this is negotiable. This part D, each member town's share of the aggregate above the minimum contribution. So I think it's helpful to put in context the budget right now, what that amount is. So I'm just looking at the FY23 budget. So the total amount that needed to be assessed to both towns was just shy of 30 million, 29.9 million. So what happened is first the two minimum local contributions are assessed to both towns, and this is what John Stamberg does, and it's 10 million Hanson and 11.9 million Whitman. And then this part, D, is the above that. So it's basically 22 million is the minimum local contributions, and you have almost $8 million that's the above amount. So 8 million, and there are other regional school districts that negotiate this. How are we going to assess that additional amount? So it is something that can be compromised, can be discussed between both towns. So I'm not advocating for or against anything. I've just wanted to bring it as a topic that currently the way we do it is the per pupil. So that's what this says. And so there is a large amount, $9 million, that is assessed to both towns per pupil. We are still using a portion of that that's above the minimum contribution. What I would share is that there's a percentage to both the minimum contributions. Hanson pays about 45%, Whitman pays 55%. Then that 9 million gets split to that 60-40, which actually is shifting 39 to 61%. Some may suggest, would we carry that 45-55 through to this 9 million? What does that look like as a difference? It actually looks like $500,000 moving that from one town to the other. I'm not advocating, but it's recognizing that when we keep it at the per pupil, it's a 39% and 61% split of that $8 million. So if and that breaks down, you can break out the difference. If you have $8 million, if you split it 45%, 55%, which would be the same percentage that the minimum contribution is done, or split it out 60-40. And the way we do it, this is proposed, is to stick with the per pupil.
Don, you set?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no worries. Everyone else good? The only other thing I just saw at the very end of this section, there was a special operating costs section, and we talked about moving that piece out. Was that part of this or not? Yes. Yeah. And again, that'll be addressed kind of down below, but basically kind of moving this getting away from this whole concept of special operating costs, because when we talked about the regional agreement, the only special operating costs that we could come up with were the emergency repair stuff and transportation. And transportation, again, we kind of left next. So, but yes, I'd be looking for a motion of support for number 5.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Any additional discussion? All those in favor? Unanimous. Okay. And then the last section had to do with transportation. I guess the key, so trying to figure out a spot to put some new language, but the consensus of the RAC was trying to move away from the town, I don't want to misspeak, but I guess the town's kind of, this clunky way that we have it now, where we have transportation that's really kind of the responsibility of the district, but then we have this whole non-mandated thing, and we kind of put it to the towns for a vote. So there was some good, and this was actually, I believe, this, if I remember correctly, this was kind of spearheaded by selectmen in terms of kind of thinking about their point. I haven't got into how the board supported this, but basically it was, look, if it comes to transportation kids, it should be up to the school district. At that point, it should be part of what we do. We should make the determination, and then again, it gets assessed to the towns, and we kind of go from there. So that was, I don't know how that conversation will go. I haven't watched and replayed those meetings yet, but that was kind of the concept here, was ultimately the school district should be making that determination. So that's item 6. Questions, comments? Yeah, again, I think this might be one that they have to talk through more. I'm not sure we're going to argue the point too much.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of information.
But all right, then I would entertain a motion to support the transportation language.
So moved.
Okay. Any other discussion? All right. All those in favor? Unanimous. All right. Okay. Thank you. That's very helpful. I think it'll help us as we move to Monday. So, agenda for next meeting, I know there were 2 items specifically that you wanted to talk through.
So just preparing for next week, because I think it's going to be a long meeting. Wanted to talk about budget. I have requested an updated version of the budget from both town administrators. Just as an FYI, I met with Mary Beth last week and Lisa last week to see where they were at. They were very upfront and they want to partner. And my challenge again is give me something so I can share with you folks, so you can see actual numbers of where the towns are at. So hopefully that will come in Friday or tomorrow or early next week, so you can have a preparation for that budget conversation. We do not have another meeting scheduled until town meeting. So we have affirmed an assessment, and you see the letter that you all received last night or this afternoon from the Board of Selectmen as a mutual consensus of non-support. So I think budget should be a conversation next week from where we go. The other piece is I am going to present to you tomorrow, sending out in a packet, a presentation answering questions about start times and a no-cost option that hits what the students have asked for, what we've talked about before in previous meetings, and it is a no-cost option to discuss for next Wednesday. One of the caveats on that, which I did mention, no matter how the school committee supports or doesn't support, it does have to be impact bargain with the association. And I am going to send something after we speak, or you get the packet tomorrow, send something out to parents with that schedule, so that if they want to come to the meeting on Wednesday night or send us an email to have feedback, they should be able to speak to you. It is a no-cost option. It's the best piece that we've put together that addresses the 5th grade, that addresses a later start time, that addresses mostly everything that's been asked for at no cost. The piece that it doesn't affect or doesn't put together is putting all those elementary schools together. And we do have some information. I had 2 folks do some research statewide, nationally, to put together I want to say a mini presentation. You'll see it. I'll present it next week, but just answering some questions that one of our members had to make sure that we vetted that. So that's going to be a conversation and process. And the other piece is, as I mentioned, when we approve school choice, I'm going to present numbers for you to approve what the numbers are going forward, so I can get those applications out. We already are receiving phone calls because folks watched the meeting, believe it or not, from other communities. So the high school received 3 phone calls today. Other things, and Dawn had sent Chris and I an email about future agenda items. And Dawn, I don't know if you just want to take that from here as a discussion piece.
Sure. Thank you. So this is all based on available time, because we certainly already have a full agenda. So just some topics that have come up previously. A future invitation to MASC and Tracy Novick to go over Chapter 70 not even saying it has to be May or June, but at some point before the next, fiscal year. I put on there capital matrix. It's not urgent at all, but as part of the subcommittee for operations and capital, I thought it was helpful if the committee saw that. The next one, I did ask for school building time. You've just addressed that, and my question was strictly going to be, what was your planned timeline for bringing something back? Because that's what you had said, so you've certainly just addressed that. And I added, the last one was town meeting. And my reason for just mentioning that as a possible agenda item is for an understanding of where you're at in Chair Howard in attending town meetings, and also is there any handouts that we would be presenting as a committee, telling our story and so forth, and what is, like Mr. Malisi said, our PR, right? And is that an opportunity? So I'll leave that to you. It's not a directive by any means, just a conversation talking. I know we don't usually present something at town meeting, but I thought just leave it there. And may I ask one follow-up question? The information you're providing on these changes, would that be proposed for effective FY24 in September?
So I would make
August?
that recommendation, again, from the committee, and then, like I said, it would have to be impact bargained by the association once the committee approves that.
Okay, thank you.
And two, just other things that are outstanding, I do have to get evaluated, even though, people want me out at some point. I'm going to retire at some point, but I have to get evaluated. I like to get evaluated by June. So usually at the April meeting, you get the stuff to fill out, and we pull it back in May, and then go through that for June. So I'll have those documents ready, and I do need authorization from this board to serve as the representative of the South Shore Collaborative by May 1st. So it'll just be a quick vote, unless somebody wants to do it. I don't think anybody wants to do it. So.
Can I ask just a question? I'm sorry, did you? No.
She volunteered to be on the collaborative?
No, I had a follow-up question to the students. So it's April 5th, and next week we're going to be presented with possible changes to the start time of schools for next fall. My concerns are getting that information to community members and your staff as soon as possible, because daycares are enrolling now. And so if you have to make arrangements for childcare, you need to be making those now. Some people may have already missed the boat and might not be able to change that. So we need to make sure that that information is provided to people ASAP.
Sure. And I think that was the whole point. You're going to communicate something to everyone this week, so that they can come to the meeting, because if we're missing something of 500 people come in and say, oh my God, you guys didn't think of this, that's what we want to know. So yeah.
So can I make a suggestion to the chair and to the superintendent? We know the conversation on the budget's going to be intense and long, probably. May I suggest that some of the other things that you just mentioned, we do first on the agenda to get those done, so that we don't get them done? You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Like you need approval, before
the quick
May
hitters, right.
and stuff. So maybe some of the shorter things we do first, and then because we're sometimes we end up at 9:30 and we haven't hit like 5 things that probably could have taken 5 minutes. You know what I'm saying?
I think we can do 2 things. So one, we can try and get the things that have to be done first.
Yeah.
And then let's make sure it's the things that have to be done.
I mean, and I know the budget has to be done.
Well, no, but I'm saying we know we're going to have that conversation. So to your
just
point,
a suggestion. I'm not the chair, so I mean, it just I just know how our meetings go and our conversations go.
Right. And dessert. Okay. Anyone else? Oh, sorry, Kevin. Sorry.
Maybe 30 seconds. No, hi Beth, how you doing? No, so two obviously real issues that Ms. Sniffen talked about too. So obviously there's the bargaining piece, right, that we need to look at, and there's also the planning, right, not just for the staff and the students, but also the parents. So certainly any proposal as far as start time, in reality speaking, we should be looking at a year out, not the school year to start, let's say in August, but certainly to look at this and maybe other scenarios, we're looking at a year out. thereafter, I think we're going to have some significant problems based on the fact if we're going to look to put together a plan for the start of this school year, just based on those concerns. Obviously, the information also that was shared as far as the budget piece, right, especially when the two boards may not support it, what is that going to look like as far as staffing or other concerns, right, trying to figure that out. And again, just kind of as we're still dealing with some of the challenges brought on by the breach, like any additional kind of like information requests or whatever, if we could prioritize maybe getting that issue set first, that I would be much appreciated, other than, continued requests for information. Let's try to get that done with here as we approach the end of the year, in addition to all the other stuff we have going on. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Cindy McGann, WHEA. I just want to put in perspective, you guys have been talking about school start times for a long time. And if you turn around and put this onto the association for a month and a half to make a decision for next year, that's not a good plan, I don't think. That's a lot of pressure on a big body of membership to make a decision that's going to impact a lot of people.
Okay, her point. Yep.
I'm just wondering, why are we thinking about it in the fall when clearly it was a hot topic? We all had concerns. We wanted a lot of information. Why are we not listening to the concerns of parents and people and taking our time with it?
So I'm making a proposal next week based on the information that we've been asked to put together from our students, from different committee members, and it's going to be up to the committee to make that decision. These are some of the concerns that I have. I have parents that aren't ready to do that. They've asked me about that, and it's not about START, it's just about daycare and their kids. So vetting it out, but I've been asked to make sure that we have something as a proposal to address a no-cost option to satisfy what has been asked throughout the course of this year.
Now, having said that, that's always the will of the committee. So if the superintendent has an idea and it's not going to impact the budget and it's 15 minutes,
it's
total.
It's going to be
changes,
discussion. It's discussion.
Then, it's up to the committee if you want to hear that. If it's no, we don't want to talk about it, then
I'm okay standing
you can take a vote right now that says we're not putting it on the agenda next week and he's going to stop working. So that is up to the will of the committee.
Absolutely correct.
But other people have requested it, and I think out of consideration for the people who did request it, I think we should at least hear it.
I think it's an understanding of an option.
Right.
No, right,
And it doesn't say we have to do it next
At this
year.
point,
We have a schedule. We have a schedule already set.
Spoiler alert that we all know, there isn't going to be an option where everyone is like, oh, that's it.
You know that.
Oh, Jeff, not to put any pressure on the guy. He's going to be like, oh, I came up with and everyone is good.
Absolutely.
There is no way. But whether it's part of a conversation that then leads into, well, maybe not now, but later, or you know what, maybe that is acceptable, or maybe there's a conversation that can be had to try and do this, so be it. But that's...
We have a schedule.
We either have the conversation or we don't.
It's not a modification.
But I think it should be presented. That's all.
It might be presented, and we may even say, hey, we're going to set a time limit on it because we have talked about it, and let's see how we can get to where we get to. Because if we're all, Glenn's point, we got a heavy meal coming, and it's going to be a lot of budget discussion. We probably want to, make sure it is an appetizer and not let it turn into not turn it into an hour, 2 hour, 3 hour conversation. So maybe as a committee we say, the superintendent's going to present it, but we're going to put ourselves in a timeline of, can we get to a consensus within 30 minutes?
And you're going to see it tomorrow. I'm going to send it out tomorrow.
We move on. Maybe that means
whatever.
We go to the next meeting.
We'll be able to vet through it. So,
Yeah, what would be what would necessitate a vote on it?
That's my point, Chris. So I think we can set a time limit of, hey, we're going to spend no more than X amount of time. That doesn't mean if we don't get there, we're not doing it, or we are voting it, but it kind of protects us from, again, Glenn's point of, we look at the clock and we talked about this for 2.5 hours and we haven't talked about the budget.
Right.
And that's priority.
So again, maybe we'll just kind of keep an eye on the presentation, spend some time on it. If we can find something that works, fantastic. If we can't, then we know there's other things we have to talk about next week. So that's good. All right, with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Sorry. Oh, yeah, there's the people that almost didn't get to go on a field trip. That would have been rough.
Second.
The field trip was presented for DECA, yes. Any discussion? Nope. All those in favor?
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Now I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Steve, you have to vote. And a second, anyone? Anyone, motion to adjourn, anyone want to second that?
Oh, second.
All those in favor? All those in favor? All those in favor, Chris, Hillary, we're good? Okay. Even if we did, the motion still carries.
Yeah.